Hey everybody, sorry for the delay in getting this video out to you. Some technical difficulties today, but here it is. Really, the goal of this presentation is to just give you some background in addition to what you are already reading on your MyPerspectives reading assignment for tonight or for today. But this is just to add a few more layers to that. So there's 49 slides to get through, and I got 15 minutes to do it, so I'm going to go really fast. So here we go. First thing to know is fact number one: much of Shakespeare's life remains a mystery. We actually don't know that much about him. He's mainly known for being credited with his plays. But as far as his personal life, we don't have that much information about him. We do have these three images. Every image you've ever seen of Shakespeare comes from one of these three. One of them is him as a young man. The other one is in middle age, once his career is already off and running as a playwright. And the last one is actually published on a folio of his work that he never sees because he's dead once it gets published. So every image you've ever seen of William Shakespeare comes from one of these three. So that one, this guy, our bobblehead that we have in our classroom, all of that comes from just those three images. And here's an interesting fact. Although we left nearly 1 million words of text, we have just 14 that are in his own hand, which is his signature, which is signed 6 times, as well as the words, quote, by me, written on his will. So that's it. That's the only thing living from his own hand that we have today. Uh, his signature by itself would go for around $5 million. Just to give you a sense, how much is my signature worth? Not maybe a quarter. I guess it depends on what document it's going on, but none of you will pay me a quarter for my signature, but someone will pay $5 million. That's what it's been valued at. So it's pretty nuts. And yes, he has crazy penmanship. Not one manuscript written in his own hand has ever been found, but if it were, $50 million is what it's valued at. So his work means a lot to a lot of people, even though I know for some of us this is your first experience with Shakespeare. And considering his poor penmanship, as you just saw, can only assume that the actors reading his work had to do a lot of ad-lib. As far as his cultural context is concerned, he showed up at the right place at the right time. He was working during what's called the golden age of theater in England. Between 1567 and 1642, London's playhouses, there were a number of them, attracted 50 million paying customers. That's a lot, which is roughly 10 times the entire country's population. So this was the thing to do. They did not have all the distractions or all the options that we have today. People were into live theater, and so it was huge. And Shakespeare came on the scene in the late 1580s, so notice he's like right in that sweet spot, that window of the golden age, and he had a market to produce plays for. People were coming, so you can make a living as a playwright. So question, if London was the spot for theater in England, both now and in Shakespeare's time, where is the spot for theater today in the United States? I'm gonna Blue's Clues it and wait for you to reply. Answer, Hollywood. If you actually said Hollywood, you are incorrect. Of course, it would be here, Broadway, Manhattan, just the heartbeat of modern theater. Of course, we have theater in Los Angeles, in Orange County, but as far as the main spot, going to Broadway is the spot. So just like the other golden age of theater, we have our own cultural golden ages. We have what's called the golden age of television. This was between the 50s and 60s, where televisions were showing up in homes. This was a big time. And we even have a second, what's called the second wave of the golden age of television, which started in 2011 when streaming services started becoming a little bit more normalized, all the way to today. What essentially that means is, if you look at this graph, that was pretty interesting. You're looking at the blue stuff is TV ratings by decade, and the beige-ish color stuff is what you see as far as film ratings. You notice the closer we get to present day, television starts surging in terms of its ratings and the audiences that it's drawing, because we just have television as a medium becoming bigger again, like it was in the 50s and 60s. A lot of big name actors moved to television thanks to streaming services and all those kinds of things. So how the form in which stories are being told continues to draw tons and tons of audiences um, still, and we're obviously experiencing it now because how much streaming is going on even in this moment, more than there was even 2 weeks ago. um, but question for us, what did Shakespeare have to show for himself in the end? And you didn't have a lot big life expectancy during that time, but he had a lot to show for himself. uh, Specifically all that. All of these plays, all 37 of these plays, are credited as being written by William Shakespeare. That's a lot of work. In modern play world, you can write one and it's a massive hit, and you're off to doing other things. Lin-Manuel Miranda, for example, who wrote Hamilton, he's now doing a lot more acting and writing music for film like Moana and all of this other stuff. But Shakespeare, that's not the world he lived in. He wrote an incredible amount of work, 37 total plays. As far as where these plays would be performed, they eventually became more popularly performed in the Globe Theatre. You can go visit this one. This is in London. This was actually a theater that Shakespeare himself had stock in, actually actual stock, once he started finding more success with his plays. And just to bring you inside the Globe Theatre, again, this is a modern day production that you see here. They tried to recreate it because the original one burnt down. You'll see an image of that in a moment. But here it is. You have the people, you can pay a little bit more to have a seat, and you pay little bit less to stand on the ground watching the production. Notice that it's outside. You have parts of the theater that are protected by the overhang, but the majority of it is open to the elements. But yeah, in 1613, the original one burnt down. A cannonball went off during the production, and that was part of a sound effect. And it caught fire because the whole thing was made basically of twigs and wood. And so down it went, and it eventually gets rebuilt multiple times, actually. Just another image inside the globe of a recreation of what it would have originally looked like. Just some statistics for you. It was circular, hence the name. Plays went on, rain or shine. You could pack 2,000 to 3,000 people in there now. They don't do that. They don't pack as many in there today because of health code rules. But they didn't have those, at least to the degree that we did back then. You could pay less, as I mentioned. You were known as a groundling, which coincidentally is the name of the acting troupe. A lot of famous comedians go through the groundling school. The main one is in New York. There's also one in Los Angeles. People like Will Ferrell, Tina Fey, Melissa McCarthy, they are all once members of the Groundlings. And yeah, girls, it was considered inappropriate for you to be an actor or an actress. So all the roles were played by men, even female roles were casted. Men were casted in those roles because it was inappropriate for women to act. And so yeah, you weren't allowed to do it. Just other fun facts. There were 500 Globe theaters around the world. That number is higher now, but here's just where you will find some of those. The U.S. we have a ton. The biggest one is in Ashland, Oregon. They have the Shakespeare Festival every year. Germany, Italy, Japan. But to bring us into a modern context in terms of theater continues to be huge and significant in our culture. Many of you I know have been to the Pantages Theater. I've been there a couple of times. 2,691 is the seating capacity, so that's even less than how many can be jammed into the Globe Theater during Shakespeare's time. Here's an image of the Segerstrom Center Theater, Orange County Performing Arts Center. This is in Costa Mesa. Recently-ish saw Lion King and Miss Saigon. Here, the capacity is 1,954. So again, you could fit almost 1,000 more bodies into the Globe Theater than a place like Segerstrom. Shakespeare's impact continues to be felt today in film. And going back tonight, I'm considering this modern, even though I know it's 2020. You have basically two types of Shakespeare films. You have those that are trying to be true to the original Shakespeare play, one like the comedy Taming of the Shrew, starring Elizabeth Taylor, a very famous actress in her day, and Richard Burton. These are big names during this time. But you also have these adaptations of these plays, like 10 Things I Hate About You, which is an adaptation of that play, The Taming of the Shrew. Of course, Julia Stiles and Heath Ledger. I think this is on Disney Plus right now. You can watch it. But notice the date, 1999. That'll be important in just a minute. You see Julia Stiles, same actress, showing up again a couple years later in an adaptation of Shakespeare's play Othello. It's just called O, but it really is just an adaptation of that story in a modern context. Here's the original one, starring Kenneth Branagh, Lawrence Fishburne. 1995. This film is more true to the actual Shakespearean play as it was originally written. You see an adaptation in a play, a tragedy called Hamlet. Notice the date, 2000. So late 90s, early 2000s are when you're starting to see these adaptations. And notice it's a younger set of actors that are casted in these roles. But of course, in 1990, you also have Hamlet released, the major motion picture, Mel Gibson, of course, being the role of Hamlet. And this is the film that you have to thank for this explosion of Shakespeare for younger audiences in the late 90s and the early 2000s. I got extra credit for going to see this when I was in high school, but I didn't need extra credit. I would have gone to see it anyways. I saw it over 4 times. I just couldn't get enough of it because for all sorts of reasons, which we don't have to get into right now. But I loved it. But yeah, notice the date. So as a result of this is a $147.5 million grossing box office. That is huge, especially for a Shakespeare film. And arguably this is the launching of Leonardo DiCaprio's big film career. The very next year, Titanic is released. So it was a good time to be Leo. Obviously, he had to wait a couple more years before he saw his Oscar, but so be it. But you have the other true to form adaptations that are trying to actually just recreate the play, not in a modern context. Here are a couple of examples of those. And of course, I can't talk about Shakespeare in film if we don't talk about this guy, not Daniel Radcliffe as Harry Potter, but Kenneth Branagh, who plays Gilderoy Lockhart in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. He is a huge Shakespearean actor. Here he is actually playing Shakespeare in a film that came out, I think, last year or the year before, where he's actually not playing a Shakespeare role. He's playing Shakespeare, the person. Here he is in full regalia. You can see the image that is modeled after. Yeah, the name of the film is All Is True. It's about Shakespeare, like his later life. And of course, Shakespeare was a big name in 1998. Shakespeare in Love won Best Picture that year, starring Gwyneth Paltrow. And the brother of Voldemort, his name is Joseph Fiennes. That's him playing the role of Shakespeare, the person, not in an actual play. So little other fun facts. Kenneth Branagh, I just mentioned, he has been casted in the role of Macbeth. Sir Patrick Stewart has also been casted in the role of Macbeth. Sir Ian McKellen, this is a very old image of him, has also been casted in the role of Macbeth. For those of you who need a refresher, Sir Ian McKellen is Gandalf. There he is, a young man playing the role of Macbeth. And the guy in the middle his name is Michael Fassbender. Some of you will recognize him as well. He's also played Macbeth in the most recent production of Macbeth. So just to give you a sense of what this means, all of these men have played the role of Macbeth, which means Macbeth has been played by 2 wizards and 2 mutants. Just think about that for a moment. Macbeth has been played by 2 wizards and 2 mutants. All right, I'll move on with the bad jokes. So here's Michael Fassbender in the recent Macbeth film that came out a couple of years ago as he plays the role of Macbeth. I'll actually show you guys some clips from that. Things you need to know about Shakespeare, though, the stories that his plays are from, he is not the original writer. He adapts them, as many modern storytellers do. The original story of Macbeth is not written by Shakespeare. The play is written by him, but the person is an actual person who existed. And this takes us to this idea that Pablo Picasso popularized in his quote, "Bad artists copy, good artists steal." Shakespeare is a great artist who steals all the time. He takes something and he morphs it into something new and fresh because he's trying to tell old stories oftentimes for modern audiences, and that is not easy to do. You have to make changes to it so it can resonate with the modern audience. Because Macbeth was a real Scottish king, Shakespeare could have written just a history, one of the genres of plays that he would write, but instead he changed it to make his play more dramatic and exciting. And we'll be looking at that together starting next week. The real Macbeth was actually a successful, popular king whose reign lasted many years. We don't know that he was haunted by witches or he suffered from a degree of paranoia or schizophrenia, but those are things we're going to explore because Shakespeare introduces us to this retelling of this history that many people, especially if you're English, you would be familiar with this guy. We see this all the time still. I just, as we're closing, just here's an example where we take someone like the Wicked Witch in The Wizard of Oz, and you have that story being retold where she is no longer the villain, she's actually the hero of the story. And so we all, or at least I'm sure many of us are familiar with the original Wizard of Oz story. At least I know I am. I grew up watching it. But we have these new versions of these familiar stories, but with a huge twist that's allowing us to see these characters in new and fresh ways. And this is something Shakespeare does time and time again for his audience. And this is something that filmmakers are doing with Shakespeare's work even to this day for us as we continue to get more and more works produced that are originating from Shakespeare. So we'll look more about this on Tuesday once we actually officially start Macbeth. But the topics that we're going to be exploring, they're timeless topics, things like ambition, the seduction of power, temptation, friendship, paranoia, gender identity, that should not be identified, love, and conscience. And so anyway, these are the big topics that Shakespeare throws us into this world. And these topics come up whether the story was written hundreds of years ago or for today. And so hopefully this is giving you a little bit more of appreciation, stuff that the book didn't touch on, about who this guy William Shakespeare is and why we still study and read his work today. All right, guys, we'll see you soon. Bye.